My name is Hannah, and this is my year of less stuff. Hey y'all, so I think that this video is going to be going up on the 31st of January, the last day of the month. It should be my check-in that's going up today, but I am just not really prepared to film my check-in right now. I'm not ready to. I haven't really had the best week, not feeling so great, and so I decided that I would just like sit down and play around with some makeup. I feel like it's just what I need, and hopefully it'll also be soothing for you guys to watch. I hope that the next two videos after this will be my check-in and then my video about how I spent my budget in January. I'm currently prepping those two videos, but I just transitioned to a new project, so this has been the first month of a new project, and it's been a really chaotic month in a lot of ways. I feel like I have a lot of information that I need to distribute across those two videos. They're coming soon. I actually hope that they'll go up either this weekend or at the beginning of next week, and in the meantime, I hope that you guys don't mind me filming some just like relaxing content, playing with my makeup singles. I just didn't want to let my actual upload schedule flag just because I'm not ready to film those two videos, which should be next on the schedule. So today I think I'm going to do what I did, I think it was last month, towards the beginning of last month, maybe the end of November. I filmed a video where I made a 9-pan palette. I kind of let myself play with my singles and build a palette that I would build if I were like doing a brand collaboration and they were letting me build the 9-pan palette of my dreams for the market. So I'm going to do that again. This is like round 2 of that video, and I'm actually going to do it in relation to that first video. So I'm pretending that I already released that palette and it's like the Hannah 1 palette or something, and now I need to come up with another palette, but I need it to be really different. It has to be like making its mark in a way that's separate from the first palette, and I don't want there to be any overlap between the shades from the first palette and this palette, and really even between the like color ideas and the general thrust. I'm challenging myself to come up with another color idea, another 9-pan palette that makes a different kind of statement and that would be useful for different kinds of things. So let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video. The first thing I'm going to do is to toss a picture of the first palette up on the screen, or a couple of pictures. I'll show you what the shadows look like, I'll show you what the swatches looked like. I'll probably put in a couple of different swatch photos because I had some multi-chromes in that palette and they looked really, really different in different kinds of light. I might be going for something slightly less rich and dramatic for this palette because I feel like the multi-chromes were really amazing and made that palette really amazing. It was sort of like a fantasy palette, but it was also kind of a reach to think that I might be able to put such intensely amazing multichromatic shadows into a palette that's going on the market. So I might even give myself the additional challenge for this video of trying to be a little bit more realistic. So I'm kind of leaning more into color ideas and color combinations and not leaning so heavily on the truly extraordinary textures of those Cliona shadows to make the palette exciting. I'm going to put on some music and open up these palettes. These are all of my single eyeshadows. They currently are all just living in these 4 palettes. And I'm just going to poke around for things that I think I might want to include and start building my palette. All right, I think that I'm ready to start. I might dip back into my palettes to pull more out because I'm noticing now that I pulled way fewer shadows in this first round than I did when I was building the other palette. And even when I was building the other palette, I ended up going back and switching quite a few things out. As the palette developed, I kind of learned what I had wanted and what I had needed that I didn't know when I was pulling shadows in the first round. But I think that the reason that I pulled fewer shadows in the first round this time is that I have sort of a concept, a vision. I have some core shadows around which I'm building the idea of this palette. And so I picked those shadows. And I think that probably these are the ones most emblematic of the ones around which I'm building the palette idea. Then I only picked other things that I thought might work with, buoy, complement, build a foundation for, build extra excitement into looks that are starting with these two or one of those two. So I had a little bit more focus this time, and that was nice. It was nice to have it be a little bit more of a guided process, whereas last time with the first palette, the first 9-pan palette, I was just pulling everything that I like, and I like pretty much all of my single shadows, so it was just a little bit more of a reckless cull the first time around. So the reason that I picked these two is that I have been really into an eye look lately that only uses a matte reddish coral. This one right here happens to be Maple by Luxie Beauty, but I've actually been using this one a lot. This is Martian. It's a ColourPop shadow, and I really like Martian because it's got this beautiful kind of mid-toned matte coral quality, but then it has a little bit of shimmer in it, and I feel like that shimmer gives it some more fluidity. It's just not quite the chalkiest matte. This is another really soft, nice ColourPop shadow called Meteorite. It's a little bit brighter of a coral. It's got more pink in it. And I've been leaning on all three of these to build this look. So I'm not actually sure which one I'll pick, or if I'll pick 2 out of the 3, maybe 3 out of the 3. That would make it a really kind of coral-centric palette, but I'm not opposed to that idea. So the look that I've been doing a lot in my daily life off camera, but also on camera, I think I was pretty much wearing a slightly more pumped up version of this look in both of the last 2 videos that went up on my channel. I've been building kind of some structure into my eyes with these matte shadows, some darkness in the corner, blending it out up over the crease of my hooded eye to make my eyes look bigger, and then up almost to my eyebrows, just like kind of like an all over the lid one color look with mattes. And then I've been going in with Baby Lights from ColourPop, but Tea Garden is almost an exact dupe for it. They're really, really similar. I like Baby Lights. I think that Baby Lights might be just a tiny bit more neutral, and Tea Garden might have like a tiny bit more green in it. They're almost indistinguishable from each other, and they're definitely interchangeable. And I've been taking this shadow and patting it all over the lid and all the way up to my brows. And the cool thing about it is, in the little space between my shadow and my actual eyebrow, the space of bare skin, this covers that and just makes it kind of an iridescent brow bone highlight, like an under the brow highlight with no red in it. But then where I bring the shadow down and tap it over the red, it just does this beautiful kind of like red to green, iridescent, all over kind of lizard skin reflecting thing, like something you would see in nature. It's a surprisingly intriguing, editorial looking, and deep eye, especially for one that just uses 2 shadows, and shadows that, you know, just seem a little bit on the opposite end of the spectrum from each other. Red and green actually are opposite of each other on the color wheel. So it's kind of an interesting, exciting, and I feel like slightly risky combination. But I've been loving this look. I've been loving putting down a matte red and then transforming it with sort of like a semi-sheer, iridescent, softly shifting duochrome. The thing that's cool about this to me is that as obsessed as I am with those intense Clionadh shadows, this look wouldn't really work with the equivalent of that. So if you take, this is a shadow from Clionadh that seems pretty similar in certain ways. It's got like a similar color, but it's just so much more intense and dramatic. It's so much more reflective that it would just overpower the look. It overpowers the red, it overpowers the brow bone, and it's definitely not something that I could sort of wear casually. I mean, I would, like, you know, I would, but it just doesn't seem as appropriate for a daytime look or a look where I'm not going to be in photographs or on camera or something like that. This is the same idea, but it's much more daytime, more subtle. It's more of a sheen and less of a reflective or metallic or glittery shine. For the purposes of this palette, this is what I'm going for. And it also fits into that brief that I gave for myself of making a slightly more realistic palette, like one that could more realistically go into production from a brand like ColourPop or something, rather than it having to be a brand like Clionadh that has nailed this super intense multi-chrome shifting formula. So for the time being, I'm going to say that Baby Lights is definitely in. To me, it's like the heart of the palette. I'm also going to go ahead and put these three guys in, they all represent sort of the same thing, but I might end up with more than one because they're definitely different from each other. And then before I move on, I think I need to ground the palette in a dark shade or two, because the thing that I will do if I'm amping up this look, most of the time I wear it, I just pick one of these three shadows, put it all over the lid, and then this all over the lid on top of it and blend it out even more than that. And then that's it. Then I just put on a mascara and go. But if I ever do choose to amp it up, like I did when I was filming those videos, the last two that went up on my channel, it'll be with darkening the outer corner with something like this. I like something like this because it's a burgundy, so it still retains, it's still in the same color family as these reds. It still retains that kind of warmth. It's not cold, and it doesn't contrast with it too much, but it definitely gives me that depth that I need to amp up the look or smoke out the look. I really love this shade. It's Makeup Geek Steampunk, but it got ousted from the other palette, I think. Yeah, when I was building the first palette, I decided to let that really rich black hold down the fort as being the darkening shade, like the darkest shade, and then I kicked out this like super dark blacky brown. So I'm going to go ahead and pop both of these in. They are different, and I feel like I would use them for different purposes, and I would enjoy having both of them in a palette, but it might be that they both don't make it in. There are only 9 spots after all. So basically what we have here with these grounding shades is we have a red idea and a green idea. And I like the way that they work together, and then I like the idea of enhancing that look with any of these shades and kind of pushing the look in a slightly different color direction. That's why I picked so many greens, because these greens are different. They are richer, they're more intense, they're darker in some cases than this one. You know, this is a mysterious sort of yellowy green, iridescent, shifting, speckled shade. It's not really like a green green. So if I want the palette to have real green as an offering, like as one of its dimensions, I'm going to have to build that in with some other eyeshadows. This one is so special and weird. Oh my gosh, it's so soft. It's ACS 24. It's an Adept Cosmetics shadow. Oh my gosh, it's really, really sheeny. Wow, I was not expecting to look like that, but it's definitely like a highlighting. It's definitely just like a really creamy, sheeny, highlighting yellow champagne gold. In the pan, it really looks like it has some green in it, and I think it probably does have some green shifting in it. I could see it working with my palette, but it's not really calling to me right now to be included, so I'm going to put it to the side for now. I'm really thinking about bucking up the greeny aspect of this palette, like giving it some more green than that. This is a really soft shade. I mean, it's the color is soft. The shadow itself isn't that soft. It's a little bit slick, ACM 19, and so it's not giving me a ton of color payoff, but I have a feeling it would be really good for blending out. Gosh, those two actually look really good together. It would be really good for blending out. I think it would look really good as part of this color idea. Now, this dirty golden olive is the color that I love, but a color very similar to this, I think actually maybe even this shade, was in my first palette, the first 9 pan that I built. So that can't be in this palette. I think I need to go in a different direction. This, while it's also rich and metallic and foresty, is definitely green enough to be really different from that olive that was in the first palette. I think that's what I'm going to pop in and just go from there. We'll see how we go. That looks really pretty swatched, and it is also green, but so different from the original like yellowy green, sort of corn silky green, raw wheat idea that we had going on with those two. I love the idea of including a really shimmery gunmetal that has a lot of reflect in it. This is a great creamy black shadow. I depotted this from Juvia's Place palette, and it's got dimension. It's really pretty, but I like the reflective sheeniness of this grayish black, which is a Sephora collection shadow that I think is discontinued. It's number 56 from the Sephora collection. I might put both of these in as like sort of one or the other, even though they're pretty different swatched, and they would be different in use in terms of the color family. Let's see how that plays out. So if I pick one of each of these color categories, but I pick 2 of the corals, then I'll have only 2 spots left. And something that I actually do think I want to do with this palette that I haven't mentioned yet is to bring in a metallic version of the red, because that's another thing I sometimes like to do when I'm layering these two together, is to bring in one that adds some depth and dimension to the outer corner, but that's not matte. So it will be one of these. So there's that last one that I swatched. That is ACD1 from Adept. And here's that first one that I swatched. This is Sydney Gray's Loose Change. And gosh, I love that. I think that that might be it. That last one is also so pretty though. That's an Adept Cosmetics Strata 2, ACD2. So I feel like not the first one. It's a little drier and it's definitely got that super gold kind of presence, that gold glitter presence. I don't feel like I really want that for this palette, but it's hard to choose between those two. I kind of like the middle one. I feel like the orange coral, but this one has more dimension. I'm going to leave them both on the table for a little while. I think what I might need to do is to start swatching as if I'm swatching the palette on my arm, picking the one of the groups that I think I might use, and then see what goes with it. Because here's what I'm thinking at this moment. I have these purples here. I don't think I want this palette to go there. I don't think I want it to go to the pinks and purples. I think I want it to stay in this red and green world, and maybe if I ground it with anything, it'll be like with a highlighting shade like this, something really, really exciting and textured, or it'll be like with a neutral shade, something really practical that I can buff out, or even something like this that would be keeping with it. We would make it even more sort of monochromatic and coral dominated, but I think it would be really useful for creating looks. So I'm going to go ahead and swatch. I guess I'll try to get 8 out of the 9 choices swatched on my arm, and then from there we can kind of see what might complement it the most. Okay, so exactly what happened the first time is happening this time, which is that even though I really like the way all of these look in their pans together, when I got the color groups swatched onto my arm, I didn't like the way that it looked. I don't like the way that it looks. It looks too primary colory to me. It's too much like red and green, and it's too much like dirt. It just looks boring to me. It doesn't excite me. I don't feel like there's enough shine in there, enough texture. And so I'm going to go through and do some switching out. I'm going to take out some of the shades that I think are dragging the palette down, and I'm going to try to push it further in the direction of my vision, which is of like a really, really vibrant, dimensional, but kind of monochromatic red and green palette. Okay, so I'm kind of ushering the palette in the direction of being even more monochromatic, like even more red and coral based. And I'm moving the green inspiration more in the direction of that yellow green or that mustardy green. And so I really like the presence of this kind of pea green. This is a tough one to get to swatch. It performs fine on my eyes. It buffs out to kind of a dusty but a pretty present wash of this color. It's too bad it's not really holding its own in the swatch though, because I think that it is helping to define the palette, at least at this moment. And I do kind of like the inclusion of this brighter pink right here, this brighter corally pink. And then I switched out this more orange red metallic for this one that leans a little bit again into like the dimensional pinky red. I feel like leaning into that pinky red for the red is serving the palette well. I didn't really like the way that steampunk was looking with the palette. I felt like it was just dragging it down overall a little bit, but I do feel like I need darker shades to round out this palette. I feel like it's getting kind of too light, too mid-toned. I need something deepening, but I'm just not sure that this is the right shadow for that. And then I went ahead and I tried swatching ACD9. here, which is like as you can tell, like a really blindingly brilliant shimmer shade. And it does have some yellow, some sort of like greeny gold reflex in it. So I think it's suiting the palette really, really well. And it's nice to see that texture there. So I'm gonna dig around actually in my collection of single shadows to see if I can find darker shades that will suit this color scheme. Okay, I picked out some more shades that I want to experiment with, but I think that before I start swatching them, I am going to reorder these shades. I'm going to put like colors together so that you can kind of see the monochromatic nature and the gradient nature of the palette. Okay, now it's starting to look like a palette that I might be proud of. I feel like putting the colors next to the colors that kind of matched them really, really showed how it is cohesive. And I also feel like this shadow right here that I just added in really tied the whole room together. This is the Natasha Denona shadow. I think it's called Sienna. It was a single in a little compact that was a gift, and I depotted it because I like having it as a single. I was worried that it might be too similar to some of the shifting or duochrome shades from the first palette, and it does look the way that that really strong multi-chrome that I used from Cleona, the one that I couldn't get to show correctly on camera, it does look kind of the way that that one looked like from one angle, but it's a very different eyeshadow because it looks like this from every angle, and that multi-chrome only looks like this from one angle. So I feel like it's not really too repetitive to put it in, and it's not really a repeat of any of the other shades. The way that it has this sort of like sienna background and then that nice greeny gold glimmery reflect, it's almost like it's a red base or a brownie red base mixed with some pigment like this. So you can see how, because it's kind of like this mixed with this on its own, but it could also be a deepening shade for a look with those, it is very cohesive with this palette, and it's almost like it makes sense of all of the rest of it. So I'm really liking how this is looking, and it does make me want to go more in the direction of the green. It makes me want to kind of continue the gradient and go somewhere with it. It's funny how different the swatches look on my arm than the shadows look at the pan. This right here is the palette so far. Like, that's the palette swatched. The pink just looks so much pinker, and even this shadow just looks a little bit more like berry toned, and then these look less yellow in the pan than they do on my arm. It's just really interesting to see the difference between these two impressions. This is a tough call. I really love this shimmery kind of seafoam green. It's from the Alomar palette, the first Alomar palette. I had it, I depotted it, and I think I decluttered a lot of the shades, but this to me was the crowning glory of that palette. And then this is Side of Olives. It's a colored rain shadow. It's almost like it would fit better with the palette, like it would make more sense. It's like a shimmery version of this Adept Cosmetics matte right there. But I feel like the one from Alomar is more exciting. It makes the palette more dynamic. It looks like it's showing up really bright and white in the monitor. It's holding its own with a little bit more of that green on my arm, but I do like the color dimension that that gives to the palette. It's almost like it breaks it up a little bit. I also feel like with the inclusion of that green, I don't need to include this really bright shadow from Adept, even though it looked incredible when it was washed on my arm before. They do serve sort of similar purposes. I might consider throwing it in at the end, but I do feel like the palette is running the risk of getting too pale right now. It really looks like it's quite a light, again, sort of staying in the mid-toned range, quite a light palette. I kind of want to put something quite dark in there. So I'm adding this brownie burgundy matte for the time being. I'm adding it up at the top because it kind of comes from the red world and not really from this green world. One spot left. Should I put in a different shade of green, or should I put in some kind of wild card? I kind of like that. I kind of like this. I was starting to feel like this palette was looking too much like the recent release from Melt, not the Muerte palette, but the other one with the Dia de los Muertos collection that they released. And I don't really like that palette. I don't like the stoplight look of that palette and how many mattes it has in it. I didn't really want this to end up looking like that. I feel like adding this in has completely disrupted that, but I do feel like now the order isn't as beautiful as it used to be. I also like this. I like this shadow. This is ACD10. It's an Adept shadow. I really like how sticky and grippy it is, but it's also really rich in pigment and it has a little bit of shine. So it almost is as if it adds like a textural dimension to this palette as well. With that there, though, I wonder if it could handle a different kind of deepening shade. Like, I wonder if it could actually handle steampunk instead of that matte. Actually, I think so, but I might want to kick out one of these coral shades. I think I want to put in that other kind of shocking shimmer. Or maybe it would be better if it was this one, Opal from JD Glow. Opal has like a pinky blue shift, and I think that that makes it start to look a little bit more like the other palette that I created. So I know it's a little bit of a mess right now. I've been doing a lot of thinking in my head, like not out loud, but I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to go ahead and put this palette together. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to pick the 9 shades. I'm going to put them here, and then I'm going to wash my arm off right now, and I'm going to come back and swatch them in a new order because I think I can make it look better than this. Okay, so this is the palette that I thought that I was going to be putting together and swatching. But after I laid out these 9 shades, I sat here and looked at them for a while and thought about the practicality of their use. When I built the first palette, I did use it for weeks after. I kept it in a palette and I just used only those shadows to make several looks. And I loved it. I thought I had done a really good job. But I found that I ended up reaching into the milder and the softening and kind of buffing shades much more frequently than I expected to. That matte mustard, I got a lot of use out of that matte mustard that was in that other palette. And I always felt like I had picked one too many exciting textured papau shades. It's hard for me not to pick a bunch of exciting textured papau shades because those are the shades for which I live. But when it came to daily use, everyday use, practical use, I felt like there were too many of that one kind of superstar shadow in the palette and not enough kind of like practical, beautiful down home shadows. So I'm going to switch out the first kind for the second kind right now. I'm actually going to take this one out and I'm going to pop this coral back in. This coral looks a lot brighter in the pan than it does on the skin. It can really be used as like a softening, sort of buffing shade, but it can be built up also to be dark pink. And I just feel like it ends up balanced. It works better with the other shadows and it balances them out. This process is giving me a real appreciation once again for how hard it is not just to come up with a palette that's beautiful and shades that make beautiful eye looks, but that's also marketable the way that it looks in the pan, because I don't necessarily love the way that this is looking right now. These 3 shades look exactly the same in the pan. They look almost exactly the same to me, but I know that they'll perform differently and they'll swatch differently, and I'm sort of struggling to remember that the way that they swatch and the way that they perform, that's what matters. If I were actually marketing this palette though, I would be highly aware that this also matters, and I might struggle with the instinct to switch out shades and therefore make the palette less perfect as like a working palette in order to make it more appealing as a palette that people are purchasing. So we know that that happens in the industry, and it's just interesting to go through that process and kind of like feel myself pushed and pulled between like the way they swatch and the way they perform and the way that they actually look in the pan, because obviously there's a real difference. But I think that this is what I'm gonna go with. We'll see how it swatches out. I'm gonna maybe do a little rearranging. All right, I wanted them to be in swatch order. I think I'm gonna swatch them in this order, and we'll see how that looks, and I'll see if I'm happy with the way the palette looks. Ugh, you guys, I don't like it. I don't like it. There's something that I don't like about it. I just feel like I'm not getting it to work out. I feel like the colors are too primary. I feel like I need something grungier than this magenta, but that's in the same general color family and provides dimension in the same way color-wise. I think I'm gonna grab my Natasha Denona Lila palette and see if I can find anything in there that fits the bill, because I don't think I have anything among my singles. I don't have that many purple or pink shadows among my singles. Yeah, maybe this. This is a shade that I kind of considered including in the first palette. Yeah. Oh, I wasn't really expecting to put purple in this palette. I feel like that's working better, but I'm still not sure if it's totally working. Maybe if I were to replace this pink with, again, one that has a little bit, a shadow that just has a little bit more grunge to it. I kind of like that, but what was that? What was that shadow? I kind of like that, but I feel like with that, we don't need this. Ooh, yeah, this is cool. So that's Lime Chrome from the Natasha Denona Gold palette. I think of it as being like kind of like Tea Garden on steroids. It's giving a lot more yellow and a lot more, even a lot more kind of green, of that lime green, than we get from Tea Garden. I like having Tea Garden in here for that sort of toned down layering option, but with Lime Chrome here, it starts to look more like a flat gold. But I'm kind of okay with that, because now I feel like we've got all four of these shades that have that like pale green dimensionality, but they're all different. And this is actually making me want to kick out that purple. But then it's going to look so much like that Melt palette that I don't like. I think we might need to take out this red. It's like maybe it's too dark, that red, or too primary, not grungy enough, or not different enough. So these two shades, whatever we replace them with, it has to be dark and bold. I think it was pushing in that coral direction that was giving me trouble. I think I want to push more in this orange direction. This is Martian, and this is actually the shadow that I have been using the most to complete this look with the green layered on top of it. Ooh, this shade from the Sci-Fi Green palette from Kaleidos is really giving me what I was wanting from this Adept shadow, and it wasn't giving it to me. I'm going to switch them out. Oh, this makes it very unusual. That's a very unusual choice, I feel. Oh my God, I love that. That's really helping. There's something about that. What is that? It's from the Lila palette, and it's called Per Se. It's like a ashes of violets kind of color. That really tied the whole room together. You guys, this is so weird, but the very foundation of the idea of this palette, which is this bright matte orangey red, I feel like is throwing off the entire thing. I keep just not liking it. I like it so much better without that. I would like to put a different shade in its place. And it's going to sort of change the idea of the palette, but that's okay with me. I'm just feeling like it's never going to work out with these two shades together as like the base of it. I think it might have worked out if I had built like a different palette and then included those two shades, but having this one hold down the fort, for some reason it led me to a palette that doesn't want that shade even in it. This is so weird. I'm like completely departing from my first idea. I really like this shimmery taupe shade. This is ACS 17, but I feel like now the overall palette is too pale. I think I need to replace one of the sort of pale shimmery shades with one that is much darker, like a dark green maybe, or like a dark gunmetal. All right, you guys, this is super weird because this didn't go at all the way that I was expecting it to, but I think that this is it. I'm actually kind of, it's weird. The way in which I'm pleased with this is not the way in which I was pleased with the first palette when I got to this moment, because I don't necessarily feel like the way it looks swatched, I don't necessarily feel like it's singing on my arm the way that the first one did. I feel like it looks a little bit washed out on my arm, like here in the shot. But when I look at the pans and then I think about the looks that I might get over the next couple of weeks using this palette, I get really excited about that. And I start to feel like I have something dimensional and grungy, but very wearable for me in the everyday. That's what I want to do. I feel like I'm not as confident in declaring that this is like my second 9-pin palette as I was with the first one. I was so proud of the first one, so pleased. But I do know that looking at this right now, me myself looking at it, I don't want to make any changes because I really want to wear this palette. So I'm going to go ahead and build up the swatches nice and clean and good so you can see what the whole palette looks like, and I'm going to give you some close-ups of the swatches on my arm. You know, I decided just for the time being, I'm going to replace Lime Chrome with this really rich kind of mid-toned hunter green, ACS2. It's not that grungy of a green, it's like a mid-toned green, but I was realizing that I don't particularly want to work with lime chrome right now. I don't really want it to be in this palette over the next couple of weeks. I'm still really interested in baby lights. I'm interested in the slightly less intense version of that kind of shifting shadow right now, something that's a little bit more of like a muted duochrome. And I liked the effect of lime chrome in this palette, but I'm more excited about having this straight green as a deepening shade, and it's also really, really creamy and rich. I'll enjoy putting this like in the outer corner of my eyes with looks that have these other shadows in them. So this is going to be the palette that I'm working with. Okay, so here's the little palette that I ended up with, and I'm going to be using this little palette over the next couple weeks, mostly to make like my daytime looks. That's what I kind of like doing with the result of this project, is just working with it on the day-to-day basis as if it were like my only palette or my go-to palette, and I need it to be versatile. That's the way that I tested the first palette to find out whether or not I had done a good job, and I found out that I had done a good job, except for that I felt like there weren't enough practical shades. It was almost like there was just one too many sparkles and one fewer sort of practical everyday shades. I feel like with this palette, there are actually more practical everyday shades. I could see myself putting this green, sort of smoking it out lightly all over the lid. Definitely these sort of ashes of violets or ashes of roses shades are going to come in super handy on a day-to-day basis. This one, this like, I don't know, it's almost like a glimmery taupe. That is my favorite shadow from Adept and one of my favorite shadows of all time, and it makes an amazing single shadow all over the lid look. And I usually like combining it with blue-brown pigment. I'm going to really enjoy combining it with this. It's like a different version of the original look that I was talking about. And I also wonder if layering this, which is Baby Lights, that sort of shifting one, layering it over this will give me a different but sort of similar like red and green effect to the original look that I was talking about when I sat down to build this palette. I didn't end up putting that look in this palette, but I do understand why. I ended up with a bunch of shades that I felt like weren't really jiving with that bright coral. I like it. It doesn't have the power, I feel, of the first palette. And I think that that might be for me because there are 9 shades, basically my 9 favorite shades, that I put in the first palette that I wasn't allowed to have for this palette because I was trying not to repeat anything or not to repeat too much. So I wasn't allowed to put in like a dirty golden olive. I wasn't allowed to put in a chartreuse. I wasn't allowed to put in that matte mustard. All of the I wasn't allowed to put in a jet black. All of the things that to me make a palette amazing, I put them all in the first palette. So for this palette, I had to be creative in terms of trying to make a palette that I felt like was grungy and dynamic enough for me to enjoy using, and that was also cohesive, but without that sort of like top tier of color and texture, without those top 9 shades that went into the last palette. Not only am I excited about using it, but it's also striking me as somewhat unusual right now. I don't think that I've seen like a taupe and green. I feel like one way of looking at this is it's kind of like a taupe and green palette. It's also a little bit of like a rose and green palette. The only thing that comes to mind is the Vintage Rose. I think it was by Give Me Glow, the Vintage Rose palette that came out a while back and then sold out really quickly. I think the color scheme of that palette had something in common with this. But in general, this doesn't seem to be something that's like on trend right now or something that I'm really seeing. I surprised myself by getting here because this is just, it sort of feels new to me and it feels like it's going to be a new experience working with this color palette. So that is it. This was just lovely. It was nice to just get my hands on some makeup and swatch around and play with color. I just love interacting with the way that colors interact with each other. And I hope that this was a fun one for you guys to watch too. I really appreciate you being here, and I hope that you are remembering to take extra good care of yourself right now so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.